I'm Brian Winnikins at World Dairy Expo, and our broadcast from Expo being brought to you by Annabis Silo of Durand, also the Animal Wellness Center of Buffalo Valley Ware Chevrolet, your Featherlight trailer dealer of Bangor, AMPI, and Commerce Sales and Service of Durand. Joining us now is Chris Galen from National Milk Producers Federation. And Chris, thanks for joining us. Well, when we recorded this during World Dairy Expo, the government was shut down, and one of the biggest concerns, I think, for some dairy farmers, and really farmers in general, is all of these reports that we get from USDA that we rely on for the markets, like the cheese prices, that is going to affect the Class 3 milk prices, and for Wisconsin, that's a big deal. All that information has just vanished, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, if this continues, Brian, and we miss more and more data, not just about what's happening with milk production and prices, but other commodities as well. I mean, we're in the middle of harvest across a big section of the Corn Belt, and if we don't have good data from the USDA about the size of the harvest and the yield and so on, then that's going to make it markets much more volatile, and it places a lot of farmers, not just dairy farmers, at a disadvantage.
Obviously, the Farm Bill, that is also magically disappeared when October 1st showed up. We do have a Farm Bill from the House, and we do have one from the Senate. Yep. So when they get back together, from what your contacts on the Hill tell you, do you think that they'll be able to actually get together and conference out a Farm Bill?
It's been grudgingly slow this year as well as last year. But the good news, Brian, is that last year when we were talking about the Farm Bill, the House hadn't done anything. The House Ag Committee had passed a bill, but the full House had not done anything. In 2012, they didn't do anything. This year, the story is different. Yes, it's been kind of a contentious process. The House actually took this unprecedented step of breaking up the Farm Bill into the farm programs first, which they approved earlier in the summer, and then the nutrition programs, and they had a big fight over the size of the food stamp cuts. But those two separate components have been merged back together, and so now they're ready to sit down with the Senate and hopefully come up with one compromise bill. I use the word compromise because inevitably when you have differences, whether it's on dairy policy or the size of the nutrition cuts and some other things, there's going to have to be some give and take on both sides. So we're hoping that that process will happen now in October or maybe even November, that they can get a compromise bill worked out and approved again by the House and the Senate and signed by the President. So I think that we're much closer than we were last year. I don't want to get overconfident that it'll get done, but I think that's the alternative. Really, is just another extension for another year or two, and then we're going to be right at these same arguments again in 12 months or 24 months. And I think people have gotten enough bruises and maybe even some scars in the process the last year and a half that they will choose to use this opportunity to do something new rather than to continue to fight these battles again and again.
Again, we're with Chris Galen from National Milk Producers Federation. Chris, about the Farm Bill, what happens if, we'll use the worst case scenario, we're not going to, there's no conference or they can't come up with one, and then they can't come up with even an extension? I mean, it seems so polarized with everything in Congress that even the simplest thing, what color is the sky, is not going to go through. So what would happen, the worst case scenario is there's no Farm Bill, and now we're back to 1949.
Then you end up with permanent law, which is a little bit like a weekend bender in Las Vegas, Brian, in the sense that it's fun while it lasts, but ultimately that's not a sustainable solution because you end up with prices that are so high that you're going to kill off demand both domestically and internationally. And first it would be dairy products, but then ultimately corn and wheat have their own much higher parity levels, and so the entire commodity complex would be affected ultimately by permanent law. So that's not a viable solution. That's why we need to have a new bill. As you said, the alternative might be an extension for 12 months or 24 months, but I think people are so fed up with having to have all these arguments, then extend them for yet another year or two, that hopefully sensible minds, reasonable minds can sit down and compromise. Now, granted, we haven't seen a lot of that lately in Washington, and as we're recording this, of course, we're in the middle of a government shutdown. What this shows, though, is that Congress needs to have some deadlines and some dire consequences to force its hand to deal with things, whether it's the federal budget or the farm bill.
Well, again, Chris, we appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we can get through all of this again. But thanks again. Chris Galen with National Milk Producers Federation. From World Dairy Expo, I'm Brian Winnikins.